Welcome to the show. This is Kenneth Muyingo, and with me I have a special guest. This is Robert Bruce Adolph, and he is a former infantry staff sergeant who is today a retired Army Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel and a former UN Chief Security Advisor. Did I get that right?
You got it right.
Awesome. It's a pleasure to have you again on the show. The last time we had an interview, it was one of the really inspiring ones that there's been requests to just have you again on the show so that we could just get a bit of more into what you're into and what you're currently working on. Could you tell us a bit about yourself besides what I just shared in my intro?
Well, currently, I've been described by a friend of mine as the busiest retired person he knows. I retired in 2014, and since then, I spent 3 years in Rome writing my first book, and I've written, I think, probably 2 or 3 dozen commentaries for several different newspapers in the United States on predominantly military matters, but also on political matters as well. And in the meantime, I've been trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. One of the things I found out that actually helps in book promotion is doing doing interviews just like the one here. So, for example, in Great Britain next month, I'm doing a webinar on leadership, which is one of the issues that I've written about in years past. And I'm doing book presentations, either virtually or in person at American University, George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., and in or outside New York City, New York University and St. Peter's University. There are also some other presentations that I'll be doing virtually. So I bought a brand new headset. I bought one with a mic. I've uploaded Zoom to my new laptop so that I can do more of these virtual presentations. I did one last month with the University of Pavia in Italy, which was actually 2 hours in length. My understanding is, according to my publisher, immediately after that presentation, they sold 3 additional books.
Wow.
So what we're doing now, my wife and I had a long conversation with her, and we decided that it's important that I go ahead and continue writing. I was very, very fortunate to have a skill set that is creative in nature, that I can do, something I can do when I'm retired. And it makes it all the more interesting. So I've actually started 2 books, not simultaneously, but I'm working on 2 books right now. One has to do with writing for writers. That book is interesting in that I've been, as you pointed out in one of my previous interviews with you, I published my first article in 1982. That was a good long time ago. Since then, I've published over 150 additional articles, commentaries, some of them academic. A significant proportion of them are commentaries, which run an average of 750 to 1,000 words on average, although I've been very fortunate with a Dutch editor at Atlantic Perspectives magazine, who has given me 3 opportunities to write opinion essays and allow me 2,500 words. And that's massively generous for anyone who's ever written a commentary. 2,500 words is a gift. The book that the other book that I'm focused on is a novel, something I've never done before. And this is going to be challenging. I decided that the background or the backdrop for the novel will be in Liberia, which is the only country on the African continent that was actually established by the Americans. Freed slaves from America were, how can I say this, deposited on the west coast of Africa in a small country that they called Liberia. The national capital was named Monrovia for the President of the United States, President Monroe. And I thought it would be interesting to take a look at United Nations peacekeeping in the time of Charles Taylor, who, as you know, was convicted by the International Criminal Court of war crimes and crimes against humanity. These topics are important to examine, particularly in the framework of a novel, because it's my belief that one of the best places to tell the truth is in the work of fiction, which would seem odd. Yet there are articles I can't publish where I can't tell the truth because it would be, well, it simply wouldn't be believed. However, I can tell the truth in a novel, and because it's a novel, because it's fictional, it may actually be a better backdrop for facts and truth as you and I would understand it as writers. So that gives you that probably gives you more than enough background to start with. Like a friend said, I'm the busiest retired guy they know.
I totally agree, because some people are not yet retired and they're not as busy as you. But you're doing what you love. That's the most important thing.
I think that's enormously important. And you and I have talked about writing before. And of course, writing is an art form. And I've never thought of myself as artistic in any sense. However, in the English language, which is a very, very rich language, if you just came from Paris, you may be aware that roughly 60% of English and French are cognates, meaning that an English word will also be found in French, perhaps with a French ending. So, for example, the word absolutely in English is absolument en français. So there's all these cognates, and English has absorbed words from German, from French, and from Spanish in large measure, based on the influence in the Spanish language from immigrants coming into the United States across the southern border. So when I say that English is a very rich language, I mean that in every possible sense of the word. It's a wonderful language for writers for that reason, because you can express so much in the English language now, because, how can I say this? It's absorptive. English has absorbed so much wisdom, so much richness from other languages and other cultures. So it's a pleasure to write in English language.
Amazing. And this wealth of experience, I mean, writing since 1982, Robert, this is gold. And then you are writing a book about writing.
Well, it was funny. It happened as many things do. It was an accident. People were asking me about writing. They said, well, you've written all these articles, you've recently published a book. I do a considerable number of podcasts and in-person presentations. And I often get these questions about writing from people who are interested in writing. And it struck me that I never thought of myself. I did writing kind of as a hobby. I did it. I was a soldier for 26 years. I was in the United Nations for nearly 20 cumulatively. So I spent my whole life in professions. But in the background, I was always writing part-time. If you will, it was kind of a hobby, but I never really thought of myself as a writer until after I retired. And then the experiences that I had, particularly in the United Nations, were so traumatic that the only, no, let me rephrase. It's important for writers to find the right words.
Yes, sir.
I was badly traumatized by some of the events that happened to me in the United Nations. And that trauma had to find vent somehow. And my wife told me that it was important for me, because I had a skill set as a writer, that it would be important for me, or it would give me a vent to get some of this stuff out. Keeping all that trauma, all that pain inside was damaging to me mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. I had to get it out. And I was able to successfully do that in 3 years over a very difficult period. It was not an easy book to write. But after having written it, and after having it seen it published, and after getting it out of me and on the page, I am, as a person, I hope as a husband, I hope I'm better for it. I certainly feel better for it. So part of my recovery from the trauma that I had suffered, part of my recovery was writing the book, and it worked. It worked. So if, for example, anyone listening to this has had a traumatic event in their lives, even if you have no interest in publishing, perhaps writing a journal, getting it out of you and putting it on the page can help you as an individual get over whatever trauma you have had to face. It worked for me. I'm a human being just like everybody else. It will work for anybody else too, I suspect.
Most definitely. You reminded me of something somebody else said in another interview, that the book that most changes your life is the one that you write yourself. Would you agree?
Of course. Yes, of course. One of the things that was so difficult about writing my book was that because it was a memoir, and because it was about me. And it also meant that I had to, if you will, I'll use a cliche almost, it's bearing your soul. You have to talk about things that are intensely personal if the memoir is going to have any connectivity with the people you're trying to reach. So it's absolutely, how can I say this? It's absolutely revolutionary. It's transformative. I am a better person now, I believe, for having had the opportunity to write that memoir. Not only to help me get over the trauma, but one of the things that I saw recently in another podcast from another writer, and it's extraordinary that writing helps you think better. If you want to learn how to think clearly, if you want to improve the process of cognition in your own mind, learn how to write. If you learn how to write, you will be better for it. You'll learn how to make a cogent argument. And one of the best things I learned from writing, and one of the things I absolutely love about writing, is when somebody proves me wrong. I absolutely love that. But there's a trick to it. You have to take your ego and stick it in your pocket. Because a good writer, I believe, needs to take their ego and put it away. We need, as writers, we're looking for truth. We're looking for, how can I say this? If you're a serious writer, you're looking to explore further the human condition. If you look at all the great novelists, and I certainly haven't read them all, but I've read a few. All of them are talking about the human condition. They're talking about us, you and me, our wives, our children, our cousins, our uncles, our aunts, all of this, us, the billions of us that inhabit this planet. That is the single most important topic I think that writers have to look at, and that is an intense study of us, an attempt to understand us better, in the hopes that someday we can be better than the sum of our parts. Because certainly, if you look at what's going on in Afghanistan right now, recent events in Yemen over the last couple of years, what's been going on in the DRC, Myanmar in particular, we have lots and lots of issues. We have lots and lots of problems. And if we can better understand ourselves, we can perhaps be, in spite of ourselves, better people. At least I hope that's the case.
And then, wow, the study of us so that we can be a better summation of all our parts.
We're a conglomeration of emotions and rationality. My experience is that emotions will generally win out. So for a quick example, a rational process, or a process that should have been rational, was the decision to go to war over 20 years ago in Afghanistan after 9/11.
Yeah.
It should have been a deliberative process. It belonged in the Congress of the United States, and it should have been argued, it should have been discussed, so that the Congress of the United States, representing the people, and by way it's constitutionally mandated, would have been in a position to discuss funding for the war that was going to take place, to determine whether we were actually engaged in the right action, whether we should have been going to Afghanistan concomitantly, whether or not we should have invaded Iraq. Iraq obviously had nothing to do with 9/11. But an American president made a decision to invade a country in large measure, but with a couple of his advisors. And 20 years later, look at the impact, look at the result. I suspect that in part we reacted emotionally, that the Americans certainly wanted revenge, and they wanted to have an impact, and they wanted to have an impact right now. Well, we went about it in the wrong way. Did we have enemies in Afghanistan? Absolutely. Did we need to invade Afghanistan and then attempt to remake Afghanistan on our own image? Was that the right strategy? I suspect not. But we allowed our emotions to get the better of us. And that avalanche of emotions carried us into 20 years of war.
Wow. Wow. And this is why I love having interviews with you. You take it deep. And thank you so much for just being open and just willing to share. I mean, if somebody's listening to us and they feel like they struggle with this area of themselves, that they find that they're making decisions based on emotion rather than knowledge or fact or whatever it is else that they have to consider, that they're always in the rush of just jumping into things in the heat of emotions. What can you share with them, knowing what you know with the wealth of experience that you've gathered over the years?
But the wisdom is not mine. It's the wisdom of Albert Einstein, who may be one of the smartest guys that ever lived. And I'll paraphrase Einstein for everybody. That is, he made the comment, or was credited with the comment, that most of us spend 10% of our time thinking about how to address a problem, and then 90% trying to fix it. Those ratios should be reversed. We should spend 90% of the time thinking about what we're going to do before we do it,
Ah,
and then spend 10% of our time actually doing it. Had we spent 90% of our time thinking about what we should have done in Afghanistan vis-a-vis Al-Qaeda,
ah,
I can assure you the result we're seeing in Kabul right now would not have been occurred. It would not have happened.
ah,
Didn't think it all the way through. Now, this works for everybody. It works for presidents. It works for me. It works for you. It works for kids. It works for adults. It works for old people. We are all of us, subject to be enthralled to our emotions. We are largely emotional beings.
ah.
Our novels prove that over and over again. You ever watch a soap opera? What's it all about?
Emotions.
Emotions. They're all about emotions. And
Yeah.
the conflict between those emotions and our rational self. We do have a rational self, most of us. But the fact is, my experience is, or my observation is that the overwhelming majority of people will make a decision, an important decision, based on their emotions, and then find a rational reason to excuse their emotional decision. So it's the face we show everybody. So we come up with some rational excuse for doing something that's wildly, wildly stupid and in service of our emotions. And that's human nature. That's us. That's all of us. And how do I tell when I'm doing it? Well, because my hindquarters will begin to be uncomfortable in my chair. When somebody tells me an unpleasant truth, something I really don't want to accept because I'm emotionally attached to another position, well, my hindquarters will start squirming in my chair. My hindquarters are speaking to my emotional set and telling me, look, you need to reconsider your position. It's interesting that my bottom would be speaking for my top.
It happens to the best of us.
It happens to all of us, every single one of us. We spend an awful lot of time crafting an image that we show to the rest of the world. A perfect example for guys is the first time you meet a woman you're interested in. Okay, you are going to craft an image for her. You want her to think you're smart, you're interesting, you're good looking. You're going to make it a lot of time, effort, and energy to make yourself appear presentable. Now, that may not be the real you, but that's certainly the side you want to show her. And there's a side that you want to show to the rest of the world as well, a professional side, if you will. And that imagery, we spend a lot of time building that imagery, working on that narrative that we think is going to make us look better to the rest of the world. Because most of us, many of us feel like, I don't want to use the word frauds, but it does work. Many of us feel like frauds, that we're going through life and we're really not living up to the best of what we can do. We're not fully capable and we're faking it. Well, we're all faking it in one sense or another, all of us. We all are going through life doing the best we can with what gifts we happen to have. Part of that is the process of cognition, meaning that if you have a relatively high IQ, you generally speaking are going to do better. If you have better social skills, if you will, social intelligence, if you're a good writer, if you're a good speaker, if you're articulate, people are going to think well of you. If you speak well, people are going to assume that you're reasonably intelligent. That need not be so, but that's their assumption. And you can build on that. And what do writers do? Writers use words in order to express those things that are most important to us, and those are almost always emotions. So,
Amazing.
so when I started working on the novel, there of course is a male protagonist and a female protagonist, and when I started writing about them together, they started taking off. That was not the novel I intended to write. That's not where I thought I wanted to go. But once these two were together, their narrative, their story, took over the novel, and it ended up looking more like a love story, which I did not intend. I intended to tell an adventure story, but these two characters took on a life of their own. And when they do that, I suspect those characters will be able to make a connection with you and others as well, because they're humans. We're unpredictable. We think we're in control of our lives and our surroundings. We aren't. We never have been. We never will be.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, just you start the story and then it takes on a life of its own.
Yes.
I'm curious about the other book that you mentioned about writing. You said at one point that it started out as an accident.
Yeah,
I think there's a beautiful story here.
Okay, it was a useful accident, obviously. I started getting so many questions from people about my writing, and they weren't asking about the subject matter that I was writing on. They were asking about the skill set, if you will, of writing. How did you become a writer? And what are those things that are important to you as a writer? They wanted to know because they have an interest in being writers too, and they thought that I might have something to give them. And I thought about that, and suddenly I realized I started writing. So I wrote a preface, I wrote an advance, I wrote a foreword, and then I realized, strangely enough, these parts in chapter 1 wrote itself. It was amazing. Yes, I've been publishing for over 40 years, but I didn't know what I knew. I'd never really thought about it. But suddenly I realized that, at least for those people that haven't published a book, for those people that haven't published over 150 articles, I knew something. And they were listening to me. And what I had to say was important. So I started writing. And what I found out was that the book practically writes itself. And so I sat down and I came up with 29 chapters in like 10 minutes. 29 chapters of those things that I think fledgling writers, people who are interested in writing, not those people that are interested in publishing per se. Publishing is that's the business end of this, and I'm less interested in that. I'm much more interested in writing for writing's sake, if you will, the art of it, and the potential influence we can have on others through our writing, and the fact that we can become better human beings by taking our words, thinking about them carefully, and then putting them on a written page, typing them up and then looking at them. I don't know about what every other writer does, but I'm working on roughly a 2,500 word piece right now on why America lost the war in Afghanistan. I've been working on it. I started working on it over a month ago, and I've written multiple revisions of it, made lots of additions to it. I contract it, I expand it, I take paragraphs and I move them around so it seems to make better sense to me. I've added sections within the article that I think expand on the points that I'm trying to make. And it's difficult to think of everything that needs to be thought of in order to meet the totality of what the audience expects. If I say at the beginning, if I entitle an article, Why America Lost a War in Afghanistan, I now have an obligation to try and answer that question. If I don't do it, it's on me. It's my responsibility. I have failed if I fail to do that. And the deeper I dive into Afghanistan, the deeper I dive into the emotions and those things that impacted the decision makers in the White House who made the original decision to go in. And I had to start deconstructing their motivations. And when I started doing that, that deep dive that you mentioned earlier, suddenly brings all kinds of other issues to the surface. If you're an economist, you speak in economic terms. Everybody thinks it's about money. If you're a sociologist, okay, or mass psychologist, it's about the psychology. It's about the sociology. Actually, some of the smartest people that have a really good grip on us, on our motivations, why we do things, are cultural anthropologists that are looking at societies as a whole, why societies work or fail to work, and psychologists that take a look at the individuals within those societies to see how they impact one another. So I read a lot of cultural anthropologists. I read a lot of psychology, in particular Steven Pinker at Harvard University. Absolutely brilliant. A psychologist of long standing, and obviously if he's teaching at Harvard University, he has something to say. And he also is a superb writer.
Wow. Wow. This is profound indeed. Thank you so much, Robert. And so you started on this journey. You said 29 chapters came out of
Yes.
a brief piece of time that you realized these are the pieces of the things that I've picked up, the lessons that I've learned along the way. And
Yes.
and that's profound. If somebody's listening to us and they feel they're in that place, they have the interest in writing, but they feel like they don't have what it takes. Or I could call it what you were talking about, feeling like a fraud, imposter syndrome, if I could say it like
Yes.
that. They feel like,
I like your word better.
who am I to even think about writing? What can you share with them knowing what you know?
That's the nice thing about writing, from my perspective, is that no matter how bad you are at it at the beginning, you can get better. It's a skill set. You can learn it. You can learn, anybody can learn to be a better writer. I don't know if you're familiar with Nisreen Malik, who's a Sudanese writer now for The Guardian in Great Britain. Her prose, her writing ability, you can agree or disagree with her politics. It's irrelevant. She's a superb writer. She went to school in Khartoum. Now, she didn't have all the advantages that maybe I had growing up. And yet, she's now being published regularly in The Guardian. And people like me are paying attention to her because her prose is excellent. Like I said, agree or disagree, you can't help but read her stuff and be impressed with the way she uses the English language in order to make a coherent argument.
Amazing.
She thinks well. Like I said, agree or disagree, doesn't matter. She thinks well, and she's impressed the hell out of me, which is why I'm mentioning her here in this venue. Okay, she's a very impressive writer.
Wow.
Now, probably one of the most important things I think everybody needs to understand, if you look at novelists, one of the novelists that I'm looking at right now is Hemingway. So I read his short novel, The Old Man and the Sea. One of the things that's absolutely stunning about Hemingway is how simply he writes. His sentences are usually very short. The words he uses, with one exception I can think of, are simple. He's straightforward. It's unambiguous. He merely describes the scene and what the old man was thinking as he battled this massive fish in the Gulf, off the coast of Cuba.
Huh.
Hemingway did not complicate. He simplified. So one of the things that I learned in the American Army was that brevity is an aid to clarity. And obviously, Hemingway knew this secret. If you want to be understood, your sentences need to be shorter, and you need to choose the right word to describe the scene that you're trying to describe. So find the right words, finding the right words, and making it shorter, not longer. So for example, when I was writing my memoir, it was, I want to say, another 100 pages longer than the one that was actually published. When I got into it, I realized that a lot of, well, probably the worst thing that can happen to a writer is to fall in love with his own writing. That's what happens. You put your work into it, you bleed onto the typewriter, okay, onto the laptop, and when you're done bleeding, you fall in love with the words that are in front of you. Then the most difficult thing to do is go back in there and cut it out. Because if it doesn't serve your narrative, if it doesn't serve your story, it may only be serving your ego. And if it's only serving your ego, get rid of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to go back in and cut 100 pages out of a work that you've been working on for 3 years, but it had to be done. And the work was better for it.
Yeah.
Once again, take your ego, stick it in your pocket, and leave it there. Brevity remains always an aid to clarity. And the best novelists are those that don't necessarily write with massive complexity, but those that are able to simplify massively complex human emotions to make them comprehensible to the reader. That's the challenge, in my estimation. That's the real challenge. Simplifying, not making it more complex. It's probably the difference between Hemingway and James Joyce. I read his book, Ulysses, and I'm pretty sure I don't understand it. But I understood Hemingway absolutely. He simplified it enough for me that I understood, and I felt what the old man was going through when he was battling that fish.
Brevity is an aid to clarity, profound in it.
Absolutely.
And this is great advice. So anyone who's out there and they want to write, get started. Just start writing. And what I take from this is we don't have to be great to get started, but we have to get started in order to become great writers.
Yes. And the fact is, I don't consider myself a great writer. I've been very, very fortunate. I was lucky in the Army to have places where I could send those things that I've written that might consider my work favorably. There's something else too, and this is massively important for anyone that might be listening to this. We're all human beings. I know I've said this before. I'll probably say it again because it needs to be repeated. Anything that happens to you that impacts you as an individual human being also impacts others. It was one of the single greatest realizations I made when I started writing. I felt like a fraud. I felt like an imposter. I was writing and people were reading my stuff, but I didn't really feel. I felt like a fraud. However, what I discovered subsequently was that I'm a human being too. And those things that impact me impact you and many others as well. So I was not speaking just for myself. I might have been speaking for maybe thousands of others all at the same time who feel the same way I do. And when that happens, sometimes I get what I call love mail. I get love mail, email that touch some. The article that I recently published in the Tampa Bay Times was about also how we failed in Afghanistan. It was a very popular piece, and I got lots of love mail. Previous pieces that I published in the same newspaper I got lots and lots of hate mail that were negative about the Trump administration. I thought that Donald Trump was a narcissistic sociopath. And I wrote that and I published that in the newspapers. Obviously, he had lots of supporters. And when they read what I had written, I got lots and lots of hate mail. So you can get love mail, you can get hate mail, but all of it is impactful.
Yeah.
You have, as a writer, I have, as a writer, have impacted people. The Tampa Bay Times has, I think, about 500,000.
Huh.
500,000 people read that newspaper. So, and then it gets spread around through the internet. And one of the interesting things I found out recently, that so many of my articles have been picked up by other publications and republished. So the Associated Press has picked up some of my stuff, and lots of others. There was an outfit in Sweden that picked up one of my pieces and republished it. The Small Worlds Journal picked up one of my pieces and republished it. I've been republished in the Special Forces Association Journal as well. It's gratifying to put together an article, send it out into the world, and then find other people agree with it enough or find it impactful enough that they republish it.
Yeah. Wow.
That feels pretty good. And it's not about the money.
Yeah.
It's not about the money. It's about having an impact, and hopefully a positive impact.
Yeah.
And adding to an ongoing discussion of great import.
Indeed. Amazing. And something else you mentioned during the interview, that when we are writing, we bleed literally on the page just to get those words onto the page or the device, whatever we're writing with. And if we find that we are falling in love with them, with the work that we have, or the writing that we have put on the paper. But then it comes to a point that we need to let go of it. Yes. What have you found to be helpful in just what other people call killing some of your darlings? That to just have to see this goes, or like what you mentioned, that it helped. I mean, the whole process of writing was sort of therapeutic for you.
Yes.
So you had to put a lot on it. When maybe we're talking about your first book right now that you published.
Yes.
And what helped you in looking or seeing this piece of work for what it eventually became?
I think probably one of the most important things is that, and this is what all writers do, at least fledgling writers. This was my first book. It was a memoir, so it was very highly personal for me. And again, it was very traumatic. But there were 3 people that I sent my book to when it was still in draft form. And they told me just how horrible it really was. Now, I sent the book also to several family members and friends who all came back to me and said, Bob, this is brilliant, obviously. They're going to make a movie out of this one day. That's wonderful to hear, okay, and very supportive. And then you have to wonder sometimes whether they actually read it.
Yeah.
But 3 people actually read the book. And they gave me back pages and pages of commentary that was negative commentary. Things that I screwed up. Things that I should have done better. More research that I should have accomplished that I didn't. So if you will, it was highly constructive criticism that was also brutal.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a writer, you have to be courageous. Writing is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
So someone might think, well, he's just a writer. No, writing requires courage. Yeah. You have to find the courage in yourself to do things you don't want to do, to say things you don't want to say, and to retract things you don't want to retract. Yeah. We all suffer from a surplus of emotions. And again, it was necessary for me to take my ego, stick it in my pocket, read the criticisms that I received, and go back in and make the changes that needed to be made. And that you had to be courageous to do that. I had to be courageous to do that. It wasn't an easy thing to do. It was painful.
Yeah.
That's how you know that you're doing the right thing, because it's painful. It hurts. You don't want to make the changes. You don't want to make the adjustments. You just finished that chapter, and now you have to cut that whole chapter out because it doesn't serve the storyline. It doesn't serve your narrative. It doesn't make better sense for the reader. And if you forget your reader, you've forgotten everything.
Yeah.
Then the book is all about you. And if it's all about you, I suspect nobody's going to want to read it.
Yeah.
Are any of us that interesting?
No.
No, I don't think so. So focus on your reader. If you keep focused there,
Yeah.
on your reader, on your audience, and tell them what they need to hear in a way that they need to hear it, then you've got a shot at being successful. Now, again, remember we talked about success. What defines success? Okay, for me, getting my book published was success.
Yeah.
If several American universities bought my book, for me that was successful because it'll sit. One of them was Harvard. Okay, my book is sitting in a library at Harvard right now, and some student of international affairs is going to pull that off the shelf one day and perhaps read it. That's having legs, meaning that somebody 10 years from now, maybe after I'm dead, is going to be reading my book, and they may pull something of worth out of it. It's my way of making a contribution to us, to humanity as a whole.
Indeed.
And hopefully it's a positive contribution. We all live in hope.
Yeah. Wow. We all live in hope, and that's indeed, it is a positive contribution, because one of the ways that just as authors get to contribute is to just let our work go farther than places we may never be able to physically reach ourselves, and
Yes.
and make a greater impact in other people's lives. And I think you are doing this very profoundly, Robert. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. So this book about writing, I mean, you can tell I'm really passionate about this topic, because it comes home to me. It just, when we're talking about writing, we could just go on and on and on and on, because
Yes.
I do relate a lot with what you're sharing and the journey that you've been on. I've gained a lot of knowledge and ideas and tips from you, listening to what you're sharing and what you've been through. And so the aspect of writing itself, we spoke about just getting started for anyone who wants to write and to just have it to get better in a way. But would you say there is sort of like a better time to write? Because I think you have had a way of trying out different times of day, for example, with your writing. Would you say you are more productive as a writer in the morning hours or in the late night?
I've written at all times of the day and night. I remember my wife got mad at me one time, and I ended up writing for 6 hours straight. Okay, she went to bed. I was still angry. I didn't want to go to bed. So I opened a bottle of wine and I sat down. This was when we're in Rome, and I wrote for 6 hours straight. I didn't look up until it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I gave her a kiss, thank you, the following morning. Her getting mad at me was, strangely enough, okay. I was massively, I completed an entire chapter. Okay. So That's funny, but yeah, it's also true. When I was writing in Egypt, I worked out in the morning and spent 2 or 3 hours writing in the afternoon. I hope to be going to Mexico around the 1st of November for 5 months to Cancun. And I hope to work on my book while I'm down there. So in between sun tanning sessions and fishing and whatever else you do in Cancun, lobsters, eating lobsters. We plan to eat lots of lobsters. I plan to work hard on the book, and we'll see what we can produce. In retirement, I get to choose. I'm lucky again. I get to choose when I want to work, and if I don't feel like working, I don't.
Yeah.
But most of the time, strangely enough, I often feel like working because I like making a contribution. There's an ego issue here as well. I like seeing my picture in the newspaper.
Yeah.
Don't we all?
Yes, we
and
do.
I like seeing the column inches beneath my photograph.
Yeah.
Right? And I like the fact that people are sending me either hate mail or love mail. They either like what I'm saying or hate what I'm saying. But I'm having an impact. I'll be 70 years old next year. And I'm still having some kind of impact. And that, for me, is gratifying.
Indeed.
I still feel useful.
Yeah. How do you stay inspired?
There's so much to talk about, and there's so much to write about. I have, like you, I suspect, I have an interest in the human animal. I find us, the human equation, far more complex than any of the equations in physics. We are far more confusing, far more irrational. Okay, at least the universe at some level, quantum or otherwise, makes some sense. We don't. We don't. We really don't make good sense. We keep on doing that. America in 1975 saw a terrible defeat in Vietnam. A terrible defeat. And you'd think we would have learned something from that. And now, so many years later, a similar kind of defeat in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What did we learn?
Nothing.
We don't seem to learn the lessons we need to learn. I'm worried about us. I'm worried about us as a species. I'm looking at things having to do with the world climate crisis. And there are so many people still walking around with blinders on that don't want to see it. There's so many people that are unwilling to get a vaccination. I know people in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa that would walk 100 miles to get a COVID vaccination. There are people here in the United States that refuse to get a vaccination because they feel it's somehow a violation of their rights. They should be able to catch COVID if they want to and pass it on to their neighborhood if that suits them. This is not altogether rational, is it?
No.
No, it's not. So I wonder about us, the investigation, the deep dive into human nature, into our psychology, into our mass psychology, how we act as societies, how we act as cultures. This is endlessly, endlessly interesting and endlessly troublesome.
Profound. Do we have a way out?
I don't know. Anyone who says they know is lying to themselves and everyone else.
Yeah.
I don't know. And anyone who says they know probably doesn't. However, they can get a following. Hitler told everybody in Germany he knew the way. Lots of people followed him.
Yeah.
He didn't know the way.
Wow.
Be careful of those that pretend to have all the answers to all the questions.
Yeah.
They don't.
Wow. it reminded me of something. One time I saw, you know, those bumper stickers that some cars have?
Sure.
I saw one time somebody had a sticker on his car.
Mhm.
Don't follow me. I'm also lost.
Actually, there you go.
And I was like,
I think you're right. That's a great bumper sticker. It's demonstrative of wisdom. The first step on the road to wisdom is admitting first these three words: I don't know.
yeah,
Okay, that's an admission of ignorance, not stupidity, ignorance.
yeah,
Ignorance is a correctable circumstance. So you can go out, you can read a book, you can talk to people, you can listen to others to know more about the subject than you do, and you can find out, you can discover. Now, this is a voyage of discovery you can take from your living room. And in the end, it's far more interesting, I suspect,
yeah,
than any voyage of discovery you might take around the world or merely traveling for pleasure.
yeah,
One of the things and this is one of the reasons why I think older people like myself need to be doing more writing. I hopefully have gained some degree of wisdom over the years, and that wisdom needs to be shared. And I see a lot of people consumed with themselves and their own opinions, and they're not listening.
huh,
And it's not about, if you will, in the United States, it's not anymore, from my perspective, about the political left or the political right. It's about older people that have a greater degree of experience with life and with humanity that are not being listened to.
huh,
And I suspect older people have a lot to give that
yeah,
they're not giving in large measure because they're so ill appreciated.
huh. I agree with you totally. Wow. This is good. Thank you so much, Robert.
I don't know.
I feel fired up and enlightened just having this time with you. I'm so honored and privileged to just be able to have this conversation.
The honor is mine.
And,
Thank you.
and so the book, the new book on writing,
Mhm.
what working title are you using?
Oh, let me see. What was the working title? A Writer's Evolution.
A writer's
Because
evolution. Yes.
it could be a revolution, but I suspect it's more of an evolution.
Indeed.
So the writer, me, has evolved from being, I think, pretty much unidimensional. I was a one-dimensional human being when I first started writing. One of the interesting things about this, when I talk about youth, I use myself as an example. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I knew the answers to all the questions. If you and I had a discussion, okay, a heated discussion, an argument, I was absolutely 100% certain of my facts. I knew I was right. Well, now I'm almost 70. Now I'm far less certain.
Yeah.
Now I've seen a lot more. I've seen too much death.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the horrors that human beings can perpetrate on themselves. And I understand it at least to some greater degree than I did in my youth.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for everybody to be a little less certain of themselves, to be a little bit more humble. I think humility, everybody could do with a little more humility.
Yeah.
And with that humility comes an understanding that, no, maybe we don't know the answer. And maybe we should be doing more listening than speaking. And that even in my advanced years, there's still so much more to learn. Okay, I like the idea of learning all the way up until the time I die.
Indeed.
So however many more years I have, I think it's wonderful. It's a gift if I can continue learning.
Amazing.
And that learning is transformative. It's wonderful. It's terrific. I don't have enough superlatives for it. But the best gift you can give yourself is perhaps the gift of learning. I'm always surrounded by books. I notice you have lots of books behind you. My own library has got over 1,000 volumes in it. It's in storage right now. It's the one thing I miss about all my stuff is that I miss my library. I miss my library. And books are, from my perspective, the greatest adventure any of us can have.
I agree with you totally. A writer's evolution. I'm looking forward to this one. When should we expect to have a copy of this?
I have no idea. I flip back and forth between working on the novel and working on the book on writing. I think in terms of the business end of writing, I think if I did the novel first, and if the novel enjoyed any small degree of success, the second book, if it was a book on writing, might be a little bit more successful, because I will have somewhere in the back of the book, it would say something like, he's published a memoir and he's published a novel. Okay, all right. And he's published 150 odd articles. All right, and then maybe this guy is worth me picking up his book and taking a look at it.
Awesome.
With one book published, maybe not so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Robert. Is there any last remarks that you would like to share? Is there a question that maybe you wished I asked that we didn't get to? This is how I like to wrap this up.
No, actually, when we started, I like the idea of going very freestyle, and you allow me to talk about those things that interest me, and I thank you for that. I think that, wisdom is a tough nut. Wisdom comes hard because it means you have to balance your emotions with rationality. And wisdom is the gift we give ourselves in many cases. And if you are truly wise, you already know that you don't know much. But that wisdom in and of itself means that you look beyond the obvious. You look beyond your emotions, and you look at the more difficult corners of humanity. So one of the best things I've ever seen, and we've heard this all too often, don't judge someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes. I've lived and worked in 15 different countries. I've visited another 54. When I was young, I thought I understood what was going on around me. I didn't. And after 69 countries, I can look to you and say, absolutely, I don't understand what's going on out there. However, I do have a better starting point for further discussion on what may and may not work down the road. So I think the most important thing we have to do, and if there's anybody out there listening to this, and if you're older like me, this is the time in your life to start writing. This is the time in your life to try a different kind of challenge. Just because you're older doesn't mean that all your challenges are over. You can challenge yourself, and you can be better, and you can still have an impact on those around you. And that's valuable. It's valuable, intrinsically invaluable, and it's beneficial for not only yourself, but everybody around you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Robert. How can people contact you? If somebody watches this interview and they would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, on the back of my book, okay, right down here at the bottom, it's got my email address. So Robert_Adolph@yahoo.com.
Very nice. I'll put that with the interview so that those that want to connect with you can go ahead and do that. Thank you so much, Robert. This was amazing and very inspiring.
Thank you, Ken. It was my pleasure.
You're welcome, and I should be keeping in touch with you.
Take care, Ken. I look forward to it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.